me Z and T, cause I'm the best in the game. I got the fame, the style that isn't lame.
Hey, is there a cassette tape anywhere?
I sure do. This cassette is the best, I can attest. Best cassette in the east to the west. Yeah, I ain't a rapper. This cassette's dapper. I'm no capper.
Okay, do you mind if I take that off your hands?
Yeah, sure.
Alright, thank you.
No problem, bro.
And this is this week's Closet Classics.
Hello, welcome back to Rappin' with the Rep. I'm State Representative Ken Gordon, and I'm really excited. We're going to have a great show today. We're going to talk about the tragic events that occurred in this area, in Boston and Watertown and the surrounding areas, on April 15th and the week that followed, the marathon bombing events. With me today is Sheriff Peter Koutoujian, as well as Chief Bob Bongiorno from Bedford and Police Chief Michael Kent from Burlington. Sheriff Koutoujian was elected this past November to state representative. He was appointed by Governor Patrick in January of 2011. He's previously served 15 years in the state legislature. He has an interest in victims' rights and suicide prevention. He's a resident of Waltham. Burlington's Police Chief Mike Kent has an interesting story. He served here for 3 years after spending 18 in Amherst, and he ran this year's Boston Marathon and was one of the first runners who was stopped about a half a mile from the finish line. So we're going to ask him about that. He has a unique perspective both in law enforcement and as a participant in the marathon. And Chief Bongiorno has been in Bedford for almost 2 years now, having served in Arlington previous to that and a number of other places. The gentlemen here were involved in the aftermath of the marathon and the investigation that led to the apprehension of the suspect who survived through an organization called NEMLEC, the Northeastern Mass Law Enforcement Council. And I want to talk a little bit about NEMLEC's involvement in that effort. What impressed me that week, and what really has stayed with me, is the community's response, both to the day of the bombing and the week that followed. Because what I saw happen was when that tragic event happened, people chipped in that day, that you saw the runners, you saw the first responders, everyone doing what they could to help us get through the day. And at the end of the day, the governor came out on TV, the president came on TV and said, we've got to now go to our lives. We can't let these people affect our community in a way that would affect our economy, affect our way of life, because they win if they do that. Go back to work, go back to your lives. And we did that. And we came up with the expression at that point, Boston Strong, because we're a community. And we take strength in the fact that people can't get us down through these terrible and cowardly acts. But a few days later, when well, actually in the next few days, law enforcement sought help from the community in the form of photographs, where they stop people at the airport. Do you have any pictures? Can we look at them? People here, the Globe, I know, contributed photographs, the Herald. And through piecing together these photographs, and the business community also contributed surveillance photographs. And through that photography, they were able to find a picture. They captured a picture of these people. They identified who they were. And by late that Thursday night into Friday morning, they had actually cornered the suspects in Watertown. We know about the confrontation that ensued, and the next day they cornered the surviving suspect in Watertown, and that's when the order came out to our citizens: stay home, stay off the street. The strategy then being, we're not going to give him a place to hide. He's not going to be able to hijack another car because there won't be any drivers out. This is what I think anyway. He won't be able to hide among a crowd. He won't take a hostage, and people obeyed. I watched the Twitter accounts at this point, and I saw among our citizens a cooperative effort. You know, a concern. People were talking about how they had to explain these events to their children who were being kept home. But it was a community. It was people communicating with each other. How are you doing that? How are you doing? How are you doing? How are you doing? Some of the tweets I got were from other areas outside of our community, where they were wondering why we didn't take a more vigilante approach. We didn't do that. It seemed that we trusted the government, we trusted our police, we trusted our fire. We didn't take matters into our own hands. And so the lockdown worked. Keeping people at home worked. And as soon as the order came out, you can go out. I think the strategy was, time was on our side. Eventually he had to come out. The only thing he could do was hold up and hide because there was nowhere to go. And when the order was called off, someone stumbled upon him. And what was impressed me was the thing that person did, I think it was his son, he called 911. Had he approached that suspect in the boat, alone or with a gun even, had he approached that suspect, there could have been a crossfire. But he didn't. He called 911. He let law enforcement do their job. So with that, I want to set the topic for our discussion about our involvement, the local law enforcement involvement in the aftermath of the marathon bombings. So who wants to start?
Well, I think what you struck on, Representative Gordon, was that the partnerships. And I think that the public was trustworthy of law enforcement because of the partnerships that we've developed, both within NEMLAC and the Sheriff's Office, but as well as our state and federal partners. So I think, you know, even in my law enforcement career, and I'm sure these two professionals will agree, that there's more of a collaborative information sharing. And I think that's what was highlighted during this incident, was that the information that we were able to share, the public trusted that, and it was, you know, collaborative, and it was information that probably 20 years ago we may not have been able to give to the community. So I think it's a true credit. Post 9/11, we saw many things change. One of the biggest changes was now that we see partnerships and collaborative efforts.
It was a remarkable collaboration, and it wasn't just with law enforcement, it was with the community on that day. I was there. I live in the town next door, Waltham, and I went down there, and you know, I got there about 2 a.m. and there were already hundreds of police officers on the scene at that time, and that's when they, you know, as dawn was starting, they actually asked everyone to stay in, and boy, everyone stayed in. And I watched, you know, hundreds and hundreds and really thousands of officers descend into Watertown. Officers from Burlington, you know, and from Bedford and from all the communities came in. And what was really amazing was, and we had our own SWAT team that was out there clearing houses. What really impressed me was, particularly in those early morning hours, when you saw Chief Davis from Boston, you saw Chief McMillan, I think it is, from the MBTA. You saw Rick Delaria from the FBI. You saw Colonel Alden from the State Police. And then you had also Chief Haas from Cambridge, who was also involved. And they were all, you know, they had community command posts set up in these parking lots, but they were all just kind of in the middle of the parking lot. It was dark, and they would speak, and then they would disperse, and they would take some action. Then they'd come back in a short while later with more information. They'd speak. And they'd have these great men and women surrounding them, all kind of listening in, dispersing, taking some action, then getting back together again. And there was no ego. I mean, these are very strong, great leaders in our communities, as all chiefs are. They tend to be alpha personalities, very strong, take command personalities. That's what they want to do. That's why they're in those roles. And yet, in these cases, each of these great men, you know, checked their egos at the door, conferred with each other, brought in other people like Chief DeVoe from Watertown. They would bring him in, speak about what was going on, and then continue to educate people and involve people. And it was never about, this is my scene, this is what I'm going to do. There was never a fight. There was never a bad word. They worked together in an amazing fashion. And then the community worked collaboratively with law enforcement that day. That was something that was really stunning. We'll never see an operation like that one. We've never seen an operation like that in the history of this country. I'm not sure we'll ever see an operation like that again, you know, for decades to come.
And you know, one of the things from a personal perspective that strikes me is I'll never forget the image, and you talk about the community, and the officer, I believe it was an MBTA transit officer, walking up with 2 gallons of milk to a house in Watertown because the people could not leave the house.
Right.
That's a vision. That's community policing. And that was the trust that developed between the police and the residents. Just what you mentioned, Sheriff. And that's a vision that I'll never forget.
It's a great way to put it. That's the trust that developed because the community trusted police, and fire to do their job. And they were content to do theirs, which was at that point
Stay inside.
Stay inside,
Absolutely.
right?
You're absolutely right.
And I think Bob and I are fortunate in that the sheriff's a little bit different, but our communities allow us to be a part of NEMLEC, have officers detailed to NEMLEC, which, and actually all three of us are relatively new to our departments. It really was quite awe-inspiring to watch their response, all our officers, really from the start of the bombing at the finish line, I believe Saturday night at 6 p.m. they were released, and they just worked around the clock. I mean, they were exhausted.
And they were exhausted. I actually had the moment where I got to go out into the community, because most of us were either they were in the field doing their job, clearing houses, or they were in the parking lot with all the other police in the command post, kind of running things from there. And there was one moment when my team said, "Look, Sheriff, can you get us any food?" Right? And we're really dying out here. We need some food. They've been searching houses, clearing houses, stationing police officers at those houses once they were cleared so no one could get back in, marching in formation throughout the neighborhoods. And I said, well, we just had some food here. Let me see, but lunch is coming soon. They said, we really need something soon. We need something now. Do you have any chips, any bagels, any cookies, anything, right? I said, water. They got water. And these guys don't cry about anything. They were obviously spent. And I said, well, listen, lunch is going to be here soon. They said, we need something now. And I looked at my watch. It was only 9:22 at this point, right? It was 9:22 in the morning.
Yeah.
They were already spent. So I actually had the moment where I went out with the fire marshal's office. We brought some food out to them. And I got to see what that city looked like, what Watertown looked like. And there was not a civilian in sight. There was not a civilian car on the road, parked anywhere. It was all police. It was all paramilitary. It was people marching in formation, clearing houses, large groups of officers, police vehicles throughout the streets. It was a stunning scene, something that you really only see in a movie, and it stayed that way right through the end when they were finally the prohibition on movement, or the request for prohibition on movement was lifted. And it was really something stunning to see these great men and women clearing houses, never knowing at the turn of any turn in a house or around a house, whether they were going to be shot or there was going to be an explosion, an IED that was going to be thrown at them. That was what they worked under all day long, these great men and women of law enforcement all day long. And it was just, they should really be just saluted for that work, because finally we get to a point where people can really appreciate what law enforcement does for communities every single day. People don't really get a chance to appreciate that, particularly with law enforcement, as much as they really should.
And I think the community, as I was walking around the Bedford community, I'd like to share a story. I was walking to a retirement party, and there was a vehicle that was stopped in traffic, and as I walked across, there was a gentleman that was in traffic, and he said to me, "Did Bedford send police into Boston and Watertown?" And I said, yes. I said, we had 5 members of our organization on the ground from the time the bomb went off until the capture on Friday night. And the look on his face, he was beaming with pride.
Right.
And that was the community pride that we're talking. And again, people ask me, what are the short-term goals? And I think the short-term goals was an added respect for what the men and women in law enforcement and public safety and EMS do. And I think that was one of the short-term takes from this. From every tragedy comes something positive. And I think positive from this was the respect that the residents had for their men and women in law enforcement.
That's right. That's right.
Chief Kent, did you have that same type of experience?
Yeah,
afterwards?
absolutely. The community rallied around phone calls and things of that nature. How many officers? I believe we had 6 officers deployed down there. And again, we're fortunate to have communities that care about their police department and give us the funding and to allow us to dispatch our officers through NIMLAC down.
Can you tell the folks
like
at home
that.
who they were? Who were those officers?
Sergeant Timothy McDonough, Sergeant Dan Hannafin, Officer Charles Ferguson, Detective Matt Leary, Officer Joe Papsadero and his K-9 Havoc, Officer Peter Abascaroon, and Officer, now one's slipping my mind, and I just put letters in their files. No, I think that's
I think I saw
Daniel Houston.
And
And
I
I
think
might add, 3 of those officers have been are pushing 30 years of service, and they were down there working around the clock.
That's
so,
great.
Again, and I'm sure these.
And it's not, and also, Representative, it's not just the fact, because, so we had about, I think, 25 SWAT guys out, we had K-9s, we had our command posts and all those things. But, so, in order to have those men on the scene, and we were there all week, I went down that Monday afternoon, actually, after the bombing, I went down, we were deployed, we met up in Woburn and moved down to 93, and we were stationed by the Boston Police Department. Metco was already in there, so we were waiting for them to move out so that we could take some of their shifts. But in putting people on the ground for any department, what it also means is that department has to cover those shifts too. And so we had a tremendous amount of response and people, that were willing to cover the shifts for the 25 to 35 that were there almost 24/7 through that whole week, covering, making sure people were feeling protected. And we had a tremendous amount of response from all the others, members of the office that didn't get the credit, probably like your folks, that didn't get the credit, didn't get the kind of the glory, so to speak, of being there, but did just as much in many ways by protecting their own citizenry and protecting those shifts so that we were able to then send those people into the field.
Representative, I think this is probably a great opportunity to talk about the units within NEMLAC. People are probably saying, what units are in NEMLAC? So the Northeast Law Enforcement, the Northeastern Massachusetts Law Enforcement Council is made up of a SWAT unit, a rapid response unit, a MODA unit, a communication and an IMAT unit, as well as a computer crime unit. So all these entities of NEMLAC were activated during this, and it's the member agencies that fund and also supply officers that make NEMLAC great. Back in 1963, 8 progressive chiefs had this great thought of sharing resources and collaboration, and it was from those original 8 communities, which we are 54 cities and communities, including 2 sheriff's departments. We make up 1.6 million people, and it covers Essex County and Middlesex County, so it really is a great collaborative, large entity.
Yeah.
So how does that work? Do you get a call from someone from NEMLAC saying, we need your resources now?
Exactly. They
How's that
have it's very professional, a paging system. If I'm a chief and I have an incident where I need, you always think of the things of a SWAT unit for, God forbid, an active shooter, a barricaded suspect. It can be something as a Sunday afternoon, the mother looks out in her backyard and her 3-year-old wandered away. Where is he? Patrols go in, they check the neighborhood, can't find him. With a phone call, the rapid response team, you can have 100 officers here within an hour.
Yes.
And they're trained, they train together, they know how to search. So that's an example. People don't always think of that side of it. The computer crimes unit, the motor unit, if you have a dignitary come into town, they all carry a lot of weight, and are just, as a chief of police, to have that a phone call away, the best insurance I've ever seen.
It's really the regionalization of law enforcement without giving up sort of your own
Local control.
Local control,
Exactly,
and your own knowledge and local control over your municipality, but you get to share these resources. Each municipality can't provide those resources. We have more resources than some of the towns, simply because the largesse of our office, but also the funding resources we can get through the federal government, through the sheriff's office, and we have 1.6 million people in the county. So we are able to get some of those things, but we always lend them into NEMLAC. And NEMLAC, before really the sheriff's office was as involved, they had their community command centers and they had their canines. The computer crimes unit is a very significant one. We think in terms of all the action that we see, the dogs, the firepower, the weapons, the vehicles. We don't realize that so many more crimes are being committed through the internet, digitally, child abuse, child pornography, child enticement cases, scamming. All these things are being done, and we have a computer crimes unit through NEMLAC that is able to be accessed by any municipality in the county or in the association. They can have that expertise that they simply couldn't have on their own, and the state police and the DA's office and the FBI sometimes are just overwhelmed on their own. So it gives them ability to get some things done for their community in the ways that they otherwise would never be able to do.
Right. What's interesting to me is that one would think about the incident that happened in Watertown, and you expect to see the Watertown police, you expect to see the state police, but you had police from all over, and I attended the service for Sean Collier, and I met some of your police officers who attended there, and it was so moving to see the patches from all the different.
Right. 5,000, a sea of blue with the white gloves and the hats. It was pretty powerful to see.
Yeah, I remember we sat.
We sat next to each other. Yeah.
And it was so moving, and then we come to realize that if this had happened in a smaller community, where at first blush you might think they wouldn't have the resources to respond in the same way, they would, because through your organization, through this regionalized approach, the same approach would be taken in a different community. It wouldn't matter that particular resource.
Right. Without giving up local control. I mean, you have other organizations that could come in, but they tend to then assert control over a situation when it's really their scene in their own locality too.
And that was very well said, Sheriff, because I think the local chiefs and the sheriff know their communities better than agencies that come in, and I think local control is a concept of NEMLAC, and that's why you see 54 cities and towns and 2 sheriff agencies involved, because the local control, at the end of the day, when these units clear out, and I think Chief DeVoe did a marvelous job
Yes, yeah, he did.
in dealing with his community and having community forums, I think that in an incident of that magnitude, then the police department has to, I think, effectively go back and talk to their communities and again, foster that relationship, foster that trust. And I think local chiefs have a better aspect and an understanding of their communities than agencies that might come in from outside.
And one thing that's really important in Chiefs, I don't know if you were at the Middlesex Chiefs meeting when Chief DeVoe spoke up at Medford when he had that meeting. It was really powerful what he said, because he was there and he was on scene, and chiefs have certain talents and places of expertise, and he knew some of what they were doing out there was not his expertise. He took a step back and let others do that. They always included him. It was really amazing again to see. One thing he said at the end was when he kept getting on, at the end when the governor and the mayor and others were making statements to the press, it happened a few times during the day, they always had Chief DeVoe on there, and Chief DeVoe would calm his city, and he'd say, please stay inside, thank you for your cooperation. And it was pretty powerful, because you guys will know what I'm talking about. He said afterwards at that meeting, he said, as a chief of my community, I can't tell you how many people came up to me and said, thank you very much for being on camera, right? Not for seeking the limelight, but thank you very much because you calmed us. You made us feel like you were in control. You made us, feel better about our leadership, and you made us feel, more comfortable in where we were. And it was something he said. He said, as chiefs, never let someone else do that for you. No. It is your responsibility, and it's very important that you assert that responsibility in a way so that your community can see that you're there for them, and they can feel a lot better than having someone else that they don't know asserting control over your community.
Isn't that part of why the community responded the way it did? They had trust and they had confidence in the police departments and their local chief. There was someone they knew was making connection to them through the media at that point in the way they could.
And to highlight your point as well is the information that the public was able to distribute was amazing and again, probably unprecedented. I could tell you in Bedford, we had received information from cell phones from people that were there, which we forwarded on to the FBI. So the information sharing that the public gave to the police, again, the police are powerless without information from the public. Again, this highlighted that the information that they were able to give to the FBI and to the other authorities was amazing.
Yeah, think about the people who were near the finish line or at the finish line, taking pictures, looking through, in the moments before the bombings happened. They've got to be looking through, so are these people in that shot? Yeah. Are they in that shot? And then offering that to law enforcement. Right. Chief Kent, did you have those experiences?
Representative, I wanted to hear, the chief was running the marathon. I'd like to hear that experience actually. And then I've got something I'd like to say afterwards about the end of that evening, but I don't know if you mind, but
No,
what was it like to kind of run and then be stopped, Chief?
Well,
it is on my list.
It was, it was interesting because that marathon was actually my 23rd Boston, and I hadn't trained particularly hard this year.
Thank God, actually. Right?
Well, yeah, it was one or the other. If I'd have trained harder, I would have been in the car on the way home. If not, so it was going to be a nice day to run. It was a beautiful day, so it was a nice run. I literally didn't look at my watch the whole course because I knew I was just going to have a comfortable time. It wasn't going to be a great time, and I hit Kenmore Square just before that as the 40-kilometer mark. A marathon's 42 kilometers, so. I was coming through Kenmore Square. It's the first time I looked at my watch. I said, if I push it a little bit here, I can probably get in around 4:10 or so. So I picked up the pace. And the first indication I had that there was something going on is went through Kenmore Square, and I saw a woman, young girl, teenager, come out of the side in hysterics, run into a friend of hers. And I'm like, geez, what's going on here? And I'm thinking maybe someone they knew dropped at the finish line, something like that. And I'm thinking, geez, too bad she couldn't have waited, at least let the girl enjoy the finish. So I ran by, and then you go on, just about ready to go on the underpass, and then you take your right on the Hereford and then the left on the Boylston. It's a half mile away. There was about 10 people stopped in front of me, so I stopped, and there was a Boston, what's going on? And someone said, geez, something's going on at the finish line. I said, okay. And I wasn't really thinking of the situation. Then people had their iPhones, I didn't have mine. And someone else says, yeah, there's something, I don't know, there's something that exploded at the finish line. And I wasn't thinking of how bad it was, and I'm thinking, geez, there's 6,000-7,000 people behind me. This thing's got to finish. They got to, maybe someone threw an M80 and they're going to clear the finish line and we'll finish. So the people just kept backing up, and a lady had her cell phone next to me, and I'm thinking, you can track online the checkpoints. So I'm thinking, my family knows I went through, and I've done so many of them, they know my pace. They're going to figure out if something's going on at the finish line. I'm probably right around it. So I asked the lady if I could use her phone, and she goes, I can't get a signal, but I can text. She goes, do you want it? She handed it to me. Of course, then I had to, getting old, I had to say, do you mind dialing it? I don't have my glasses. So she was nice enough to
Not old enough to run the marathon.
Yeah.
Kudos.
She was nice enough to text my family that I was okay. They kept us there for about a half hour, and of course, now, as far as you can see, it's people stopped behind you. And then they came out with a bullhorn and said, the Boylston's closed, the marathon's canceled, continue down to Boston Common. So as we continued down, I could look up the side streets and see obviously the emergency personnel were still arriving. But I still, until I got to my car and got home, and actually I got to my car and turned on my cell phone, and of course it blew up with text messages, cell phones, email, very humbling actually. But it wasn't until I got home and put the TV, and then that was a holy moly moment. I could not believe what took place.
Yeah.
And then I would assume the next morning, is that when you got the call from NEMLEC? And
No,
sprang
actually,
action?
as I was leaving, once I got out of Boston in the tunnel on 93, I got cell service. So Sergeant Tim McDonough, who's been a member of the SWAT team forever, I texted him. I said, I don't have cell service. Can you call my cell? And he called me right back. And I said, what's going on? And he said, there's a pretty good explosion. They hadn't been called out yet, but
They were on standby at that point.
Okay, yeah.
They had staged in Woburn,
Right.
and I think that all of NEMLEC, SWAT, and RIT were on standby per Boston.
Right.
So.
And then shortly thereafter, they got the call, and they all headed in for.
So that was that
deliberation.
scene. It was stationed by that new exit Commerce, I think,
Yeah,
somewhere up there. And actually, I went there too, and
Yeah.
it was amazing. They had, 50 or 60 cars from NEMLEC, actually, including some SWAT vehicles, all just in one line heading into Boston, just one long line with the lights going, and then proceeded right in by Boston Police Station. And then just kind of waited because they had enough deployment throughout the city at that time, and so they didn't want to kind of put more people in there necessarily, so then they had to wait for some of those. So these guys, NEMLEC guys, actually had to wait for, I don't know how many hours. They were probably there, 8 or 10 hours anyway, before they were then able to go into the city and assist in that way. Which was very frustrating for them, sitting in a parking lot for that period of time, knowing that was what they needed to do before they went in.
Yeah, but again, everyone did their job, and in doing so, and I think Chief Kent, you and I had talked about this, they didn't get in the way. They
That's right,
realized
that's
this
right.
is where we need to be.
Right.
Self-deployment is a very bad thing.
Yeah. Absolutely,
Yeah.
and it shows what a disciplined organization that NEMLEC is,
Right.
and the officers that responded. I think the other thing that shows is the intelligence at that point. I think from the intelligence at that point was, from Boston, was that they didn't know what actually had happened, if there were more cell networks in town. So they were deploying officers to all the major infrastructure around the city, including hospitals and hotels, because as you can imagine, there were runners that were coming into the city. And at that point, I know that there was a talk about trying to keep the community calm. And again,
Right.
Commissioner Davis does a marvelous job of dealing with the community, but keeping the community calm and having a presence of force there to do that, so the city could move on, yet probably undertake the largest investigation that the city and the state has ever seen.
That's right. And a lot of that was as much for safety as it was for keeping people calm.
Yeah.
I mean, I took my kids to the Big Apple Circus the next morning. We had tickets. It was one of those moments you're saying, geez, I don't know, is it safe or not? And yet I didn't want to, as it was said, you wanted to live your life. It was really important you went and lived your life. But when you went into town, there were thousands of police with the long guns in their uniforms, with their SWAT. It was a tremendous presence, and it was very calming to know that you could take your kids to the circus and you felt like you were protected in that area. It was very important for me and my family when we went in there.
And it must have also felt important to do your part in showing the Boston strong
right.
community aspect. They can't get us down, and the show or the circus will go on.
That's right. That's right.
So Chief Kent, so you came back from the marathon, tired as you must have been. How long did it take before you sprang back into action now as a police chief?
Oh, well, as a chief, you're not a boot on the ground anymore, but no, I was in constant contact with my guys that were going into Boston, and I was back in work the next morning. So, just you worry about your community with something like that getting hit so close to home. Really, when you think about it, it's a relatively short distance as the crow flies, and I think a lot of this we come full circle. A lot of this comes back to, particularly at the scene in Watertown, is the leadership. The boots on the ground represent the leadership. We're very lucky.
Right.
We got a great sheriff. Anything I've ever needed, he's a phone call away. Tim Albin's the colonel of the state police. His second in charge, Jim Hannafin, who's from Burlington, I might add. The state police are wonderful partners. NIMLAC, the leadership that was shown down there was phenomenal by all parties involved.
Talk about, Sheriff, the structure of the sheriff's involvement, Middlesex County Sheriff's Office. How did you become involved? What did you do on that day and then other investigation?
We participate with NEMLEC, so we don't sort of just go out on our own. It's not a self-deployment. We're called in, and we join the call. And so that's why NEMLEC there are really two SWAT units in NEMLEC. There's the NEMLEC proper SWAT unit, which is sort of supplied or manned by the police departments themselves, all sharing. And then we have our own complete and separate SWAT unit that we then also lend. And that's what we lent that day too. We had our SWAT unit in that day, and it was really impressive just watching. For you folks to see just your own people doing something like that is really powerful and impressive, and it makes you feel really. And you just want people to know about the great work of the people in your office and your department, because it's you're proud of it. I'm proud of my men and women that took. That risked themselves along with brother and sister officers from across New England, really. It was an amazing day.
They risked life, but they also, this is a credit to their families as well. We had an employee recognition ceremony where we acknowledged the 5 officers that responded to Boston and Watertown. But it was also important for us to recognize their families, because their families made a huge commitment.
Right.
Every day that the men and women put on the badge and the uniform, there's a threat, there's the unknown. And this unknown was magnified immensely with their response to Boston. And our officers, we can attest, had logged hundreds of hours in Boston fighting this act of terror. And I think it was the unknown families at home, the unknown that the families had to deal with at home, which is probably more trying than, as difficult as the job was of our men and women that were searching house for house, and the NEMLAC SWAT unit searched over 200 houses. I can only imagine what the families were feeling at home, and that in and of itself should be recognized as well.
Absolutely.
And I was at the scene. I wasn't in the field so much. My family was worried about me, and we have to remember too that I didn't realize. I didn't really realize that my kids were younger, and that they worried in ways that I felt. You're never safe in any situation like that, but I felt completely safe. I was surrounded by hundreds of officers. You never know; anything can happen. I wore my vest all day long, because I know when you're in the field, you do that. But it affected my kids a little bit more than I think other kids were affected, simply because their dad was there, and they probably worried a little bit more. And as you said, Chief, Officer Collier, we think about, you just go to do your job, and simply by dint of the fact that you're a law enforcement officer, he was assassinated. And Colonel DeFava, Chief DeFava of MIT, spoke at the Natick Police Week Appreciation Day, the Day of Remembrance, and he had this great story about an older guy with a younger colleague. I think it was in the Coast Guard, and his words were the kid was worried about having to go out to search for a sinking ship, and in the tale of this, or the words that he said, and I remember I spoke with him just yesterday about it, where you have to go out, but you don't have to come back, right? And so for police officers,
that's right.
They have to go out. They don't have to come back, and that's something that I think people don't really appreciate. They think it's not that big a deal. Well, at any moment, it can be a big deal.
Yeah, and we just celebrated Memorial Day, and in Bedford we had a representative, a colonel from Hanscom, and he reminded people that, especially now after what we went through on Marathon Monday, and in the week that followed, and Sean Collier, that our veterans include now our first responders, our police forces, because they protect us every bit as much, and Memorial Day is now expanded to include Sean Collier and folks like him who have fallen in the line of duty as a first responder in that way.
Right.
So Chief Bongiorno, you mentioned the 5 that you honored from Bedford. Who were the people that came in?
Sergeant Toll, who's actually Charlie 1, he's the SWAT commander. Sergeant Wardwell has a leadership role in the rapid response team. Tom Devine, Officer Devine, is attached to the motor unit. Jeffrey Venchula, Emergency Communications Officer, is attached to IMAT, as well as Emergency Communications Officer Sherry Dooley. Again, 5 outstanding individuals who, as the Sheriff and Chief Kent mentioned, I could not be more proud of. They did just marvelous work, and I'm extremely proud, and I know the Bedford community is as well.
Absolutely. You know, we were, as many people, I was riveted to the TV watching during the day that Friday, and then when the second suspect was caught at the end of the day, you saw the outpouring of emotion from the people in Watertown, and Sheriff, you were there, I'm sure.
I was there, yeah.
Can you describe what that was like to be
Yeah.
there?
Well, there was something more powerful. You know, the news cameras caught a lot of people that were in front of a convenience store, and they were chanting USA and USA, and that was really exciting, I guess. The exuberance was exciting, but there was something much more powerful that I saw before that, because I went out with Chief Pagonis in Wilmington, who was making sure that I was protected the whole time, because there were hundreds of police officers running around with guns, and there were some that were not exactly, they were self-deploying a bit, shall we say, because everyone wanted to be part of the action. So there was a lot of people running around in places they shouldn't have been. There was always a danger of some crossfire, because there were so many people, they wanted to go get that bad guy, and then you had your tactical units that were in. And I sat with Chief Pagonis probably about 6 or 8 houses away from the point of capture. And I remember, you know, this went on for a period of time. And as it was said to me, they had the helicopter flying above, they had the flashbangs going, they were talking to him, and you know, some people were getting antsy, and he's like, look, time is on our side. When we've got a guy in a corner like this is the police tactics that I wouldn't have really known about. We can go to the bathroom, we can get something to eat, we can get something to drink. They cannot. So time is on our side, so let's take our time. And so they did that. But at the point of capture, it was pretty powerful moment, because you were in the middle of this neighborhood, close-knit neighborhood with small streets. And the streets were choked with abandoned police vehicles, you know, SWAT vehicles and police vehicles. They'd all drove there. They all left them in the middle of the streets, you know, and it wasn't a problem. It was just that it was all just jammed. And so then, and you're in this close-knit community, you could see the lights were on, and you could see the TVs were on. They were watching CNN, they were watching Fox, they were watching local news, they were seeing what was going on. And there was the moment of the capture when it must have gone out on the radio, and they must have announced it over the televisions as well, when, you know, it was safe now to kind of go there and just to see the scene, because I wanted to see the actual, you know, the capture, or some point of the capture. And on the way down, the word must have gone out through the televisions, because it was on the way down. You couldn't see anyone in the houses, but you could see the lights on. And from the second story windows, really, you could hear people calling out, you know, kind of quietly, but saying, you know, just calling out thank you, you know, thank you and great job. It was really, it gives me goosebumps right now thinking about it. And then you went down and I saw him being taken away by the ambulance, and, you know, it was just a wonderful moment. And as everyone now was leaving that scene, hundreds of officers just marching out informally, streaming out the different streets, and then people actually, like, you know, coming to the porches, and they were applauding, and they were yelling great job and thank you. And then as the further you got on, they were coming to the streets, they were coming to the sidewalks, and they were saying thank you. They were shaking your hands, they were giving you high fives, they were saying great job, they were asking you to shake the hands of their kids. That was, you know, I mean, great people chanting in front of a convenience store was powerful, and that was wonderful, but this kind of homegrown, organic appreciation of a neighborhood, just at those moments, watching these great heroes walking back, tired and exhausted, was one of the most powerful experiences of my entire life, and I will never forget that moment. It was really something very special.
Chief, as law enforcement yourself, how do you respond to that? How does that make you feel?
Again, the pride, you know, and listen to the sheriff eloquently describe that. You get choked up. The pride, but the pride in a different role. Again, as Chief Kent mentioned, in our role, it's the support, supporting our troops, our officers that were there, and in that role, and it's a new role for me, and I think it's a role that we have to play. And again, the credit due is to the men and women of our department that were there, fighting the fight, defending essentially the nation. From a personal perspective, on that Saturday, my wife and I had said, what can we do after the capture on Friday night? and we went into the Red Sox game. And I can tell you from a personal perspective,
Wow.
the Red Sox did a fantastic job, and they had the first responders from Boston, surrounding communities, as well as Nemlac on the field. They did a great video presentation, a capture of the events, and then Neil Diamond coming out into the eighth inning. That, for me, from a personal perspective, was probably such a patriotic feeling that I had, and how proud I was to be in law enforcement, and how proud I was of the officers that responded to Boston and Watertown.
Yeah. Top that, Chief Kent. You can't top that one. Sweet Caroline. That's unbelievable.
I'll never listen. You know, again, the song was probably getting old for many of us that were in Boston.
Yeah, it was.
But every time I hear that song now,
Right.
it has
Totally
new
different.
meaning. It's
Right.
totally different.
Yeah, it's completely revived. And did you know, being at the game, that he had just volunteered and called up and said, I want to do this?
No, I didn't, and I found that later out in the news. But at that time, I thought that the Red Sox had planned that, and it wasn't until a day or so later that I found out it was unplanned.
Yeah, either way, it was great. Chief Kent, your reaction?
You know, it's the same thing. You're so proud of your personnel, but also, again, the way the whole community at large, this segment of the community responded, and you know, it's just you know, it's almost humbling the way the officers were treated, and I think we're all humbled by the response from the community. You know, it was very.
It
very
must have
nice.
been so emotional as a job well done.
Yeah.
On that day, no civilian was harmed on Friday. And that, starting out, I mean, we didn't know that would be the case. And law enforcement did its job, and like you say, just waited the guy out.
Yeah, and we were, you know, listen, that night when they lifted the prohibition on movement, I think it was really a realization that we were pretty sure he was there. You know, not we, but they were pretty sure he was in that area.
Yeah.
But after that whole day of search, you can't keep people in the whole rest of the
Right.
night while you're searching. It becomes more dangerous as well. And I think it was just a realization we can't keep people inside anymore, in the hope that maybe, you know, when the community had helped solve the crime in the first place, maybe the community could help end this situation, and that's exactly what happened. But it was a nervous time, I know, for the governor, the mayor, and all the others that declared it. They were not exactly sure they just weren't sure what the right thing, but they knew they couldn't keep people hemmed in. I mean, during the day, you have to remember that there was talk that that they stopped the train in Connecticut. That was southbound in Connecticut.
And there was a taxi that had left early morning
That's right,
from Arsenal
right, that's
Street
right.
in Watertown.
Right, and there was supposed to be blood spatter that matched the blood, and there was a guy that was detained in Midas, in a place in Watertown that was non-compliant, that they thought might be involved. There was a call by someone else that called in saying, I'm being held at gunpoint right now. That was a false call. So all day long. So I remember at 6 o'clock when they lifted the ban, and my guys did not self-deploy. Actually, my guys showed great restraint, and not many other people did not do this. But our SWAT team did not self-deploy. But when that last call came in, everything was, they did the press conference, and they were like, all right, let's break it out. And I was just getting ready. I was going to go up to an event in Lowell. I was exhausted, but I was going up there. And then there was a last call, shots fired, and I'm thinking it's just another bogus call. We had so many during the day. I said, you know what, I've been here all day, I might as well finish this off, and that's when I went with Chief Pagonis, and we went down there, and that was the real deal. But after a day of so many false alarms, it was exciting to finally have it over and to know that the community was secured and everything worked out just the way that law enforcement predicted and planned for it to do so. It was really in the way that the community would have hoped.
I can't imagine it working out any better for the result that we got, with respect to law enforcement and with respect to the community and the way the community cooperated.
And I think something the sheriff mentioned is that the information that the governor was receiving, this intelligence information, now I think the public will realize, why rail service was shut down, why the MBTA, why the cab service was stopped, why the commissioner stopped cab service in the city of Boston. As this information developed, it was very real, and there was a significant threat to the community that the scope may have expanded outside of Watertown. So I think the governor acted, our elected officials acted very prudently, and I think with the information that they had at the time, it's always easy to Monday morning quarterback, but at the information that our elected officials and our leaders had at the time, every strategic decision was made appropriately.
Chief Kent, will you be running the marathon again next year?
Oh yeah.
Do you expect a different kind of a feeling or a special feeling? Or?
I don't know. I'm not that, type of emotional guy, so we'll see. but I'm looking forward to it. It's a special event regardless of what took place this year. I would encourage anyone that's ever thought about running a marathon to do that marathon. It's a great day. But
Sheriff, are you
I'll
pledging
be out
this year
there.
to run? Did I hear
No, I
that?
don't. But I'm not sure you are. Are you going to be running it?
Look at me. No.
I was going to say, so I'm in the same company. I will not. I will pledge not to run the marathon next year, I believe.
Has the attitude or has the environment around the police station changed at all? Has it been affected since the days of the week of the marathon?
I think so. I think that there's a great amount of pride within our building, and I think especially what's most noticeable is the community pride, and I think that is what's noticeable. And I think when you talk to these heroes that responded, I think that they're telling you that it was just another day at the office. So I think they don't want to take the credit that they so deserve. But so from a day-to-day operations perspective, I think that they're trying to keep it in perspective. But what we really see is the pride in the community, especially Bedford. The residents have taken great pride, and I couldn't be more pleased and proud.
Chief Kent, do you notice a difference in Burlington?
Yeah, I think you do. I think, as a whole, the officers are proud of the officers that responded down. But I think even, that scene in Watertown that erupted, it's when you're in kind of a bedroom community, it's a wake-up call, again, where things, it can happen in any of our communities. Those bad guys could have been up here. I'm sure Chief Bongiorno will tell you, when that fellow was still at large, I was worried about Burlington. You're so close by. There's so many soft targets. Let's face it. The guy's a nut. Is he going to drive to Burlington and do something?
We had multiple communication throughout the day
Yeah.
with neighboring communities talking about that very threat, increasing security. We had issues in Lexington, in Bedford, and
Yeah.
Burlington. So all the chiefs were collaborating and putting a plan in place if it came into our local communities.
Yeah.
And Sheriff, you must have the same sort of pride in a job well done.
We do. We don't get, so with local police departments, they'll know that their men or women went in. With the sheriff's office, they don't really know that because we don't report to a locality that way. And so sometimes my men and women don't get the credit that they deserve in something like that. That's why I try and go out and tell people about the great work of our officers that participated. And again, not just the officers that went in, but all the other officers that took extra time out of their own personal lives to cover shifts and to make sure that those people could go in and take care of that. That's something of which I'm very proud. And I know that the office is proud of itself too, which is something that's very gratifying to see them feel good about something that they participated in.
Well, I'm honored that you were able to come on here and willing to come here and talk to the folks of Burlington and Bedford about that pride and to have that forum so that your folks could hear that, as well as for the communities of Bedford and Burlington. Thank you, Chief Kent, for coming on. Thank you, Chief Bongiorno.
Thank you, Representative, for
Thank
having
you,
us.
Sheriff.
And thank you
Very
for
good.
your leadership as well and your support.
Thank
right.
you.
That's right.
Thank you. This is Ken Gordon. This was Rappin with the Rep, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Thank you.